The Man at the Gas Station. I was 18 when my parents left on a week-long anniversary trip. My sister had already moved out by then, so I had to take care of the property. My parents' house is surrounded by lush forests and has a dirt road of several meters that leads to the road. The road is a quiet and colorful road, with properties of similar size on both sides, all separated by a considerable distance, so one feels really isolated. Everyone in the village knows each other. You see familiar faces all the time at the gas station, at the grocery store, at bars, which I learned a few years later when I started going to them. Speaking of gas stations, this story begins one day while my parents were away. I was at a gas station filling up my tank when a black Jeep Cherokee stopped at the pump next to mine. A man with a goatee came out, greeted me, and began filling his tank. In that town, it was normal for strangers to greet each other like that. He blocked his nozzle in the gas tank and then walked over to my side of the pump and said, "Excuse me, do you know how to get to the highway from here?" I helped him as best I could. He took out a notebook and began to write down the addresses I gave him. Very strange how he didn't do it on his mobile phone, as anyone else would. He thanked me and asked me if I am from the area. I told him yes, I grew up there, and he said I was from out of town. He didn't specify where. Then he went back to his side and put the nozzle on the pump. Then he asked me my name while saying, "Nice to meet you." I told her my name was Laura. He said, "What a lovely name," and then got into his car. As I climbed into mine, he got out first and turned left to walk up the road back home. It was only a few minutes of driving before I was getting to our driveway. I slowed down, put the signal up, and then turned right onto the property. At that moment, I noticed that the car behind me was the same black Jeep Cherokee that was going there. Was he following me? He overtook me as I turned into our driveway. It was in the completely opposite direction from the one I told him to take to get to the highway, and at that moment, I didn't notice anything suspicious. As he passed me, he didn't slow down or anything, so it seemed like maybe he just forgot the directions I gave him and went the wrong way. I let myself go inside and continued with the rest of the day doing whatever I could. I think it was that night when I was going out to meet my friends that I went out and walked to my car and heard the sound of footsteps nearby. Like I said, the house is surrounded by woods, and this was in the middle of summer, so it could have been any number of animals, so I didn't investigate. I just got in the car and drove off, but when I returned home hours later and walked from my car to the house, a male voice from somewhere in the woods called out to me, "Laura." I got chills as I looked around, and then, in a panic, I ran to open the front door. I slammed it shut and sat down on the couch to breathe. All the neighbors knew my name, but the houses weren't on top of each other, so it's a bit of a hike, and there was no reason for one of them to call my name like that, as creepy and not identify himself. I decided to call my parents to tell them, and their explanation was that it must be one of the neighbors, and that they would probably knock on the door. I didn't tell them about the encounter at the gas station. The next day, which was Saturday, I stayed home most of the day, and later that night, I was once again going out to meet my friends. After getting ready and everything, I went outside, and as I walked to my car, I heard loud and clear, from not far away, that someone was calling Laura again. This time I didn't wait a second. I ran back to the house and locked the door. I called 911 this time, texting my family as I did so. After 2 police officers arrived at the home, they looked around the perimeter of the property with their flashlights and then came back and said to call again if this persisted. I didn't feel much better after this. They didn't really do much. I avoided leaving until the next day when I had to go to work. She was a waitress at a nearby restaurant. He was working a night shift. I left the house in broad daylight, paranoid to hear that voice again. Thankfully, I didn't. Maybe seeing the police car finally scared them. After many hours of work, I was ready to go home and collapse in bed. I entered the property, parked the car in front of the house, and walked to the front door. I stopped when I heard the sound of footsteps again. It didn't sound like animal footsteps. I stood on the front porch for a second, waiting, and then that familiar voice screamed again, saying, "Laura, don't call the police again, pretty." I shouted, "You need help? You're sick." And I went into the house. I called the police once again, and they came again, searched the perimeter again, and left, finding absolutely nothing again. My parents told me that I should stay at a friend's house for the night. I couldn't agree more. They would be back the next night, so after that I would feel much safer being there. My friend Anna told me I could stay with her that night, so I packed a backpack and I was ready to go. I checked the windows first to make sure everything was clear and tightly closed above all else. Then I got out and locked the door as fast as I could. Seconds later, I ran to the car. As I turned the key on the ignition, I heard something just to my left. Just outside the driver's door was a man wearing a face mask trying to open the door. I couldn't even scream. I felt like I was drowning in air as I started the car. He began to hit the glass with his elbow. I turned around with my car on the lawn and sped down the driveway, turned right onto the road, and didn't stop until I reached Anna's house. I was crying hysterically the whole way, while I had Anna and her dad on the phone with me. He said he would have come to get me if he had known the situation. We called the police together for the third time in total. A couple of officers went to my parents' house to investigate again and make sure there were no broken windows or anything. An officer came to Anne's house, where I once again gave my description of what happened. This was probably the biggest action these cops had seen in a long time in this quiet town. Thankfully, my parents returned the next day, and I felt safe staying home again. I fully believed that the man at the gas station intentionally followed me home and guarded the place, realizing that I was alone, and for some reason played with me until he really tried to attack me. I shouldn't have given my real name, and I should have been more alert to my surroundings and realized that he was following me in his car that day. Some people are crazy and have too much free time. This incident was a huge motivating factor for me to move into my own apartment a few months later and never give my name to anyone again in such a casual encounter. Bare feet. I grew up in rural Michigan. There was hardly anything to do. If you liked to look at trees and crops and spend a lot of time alone, that was the place to be. I left there as soon as I got a car and enough money to move. It's not that I hate nature or anything, but I prefer to be close to a big city. My parents no longer own that property. They sold it 5 years ago. To describe it, it was a 3-acre property. The house was quite large, and there was a storage room in the back. I was 13 years old when this happened. My parents often left me alone at this age. They trusted me because I matured at a young age and had responsibilities in the property. It was a weekend, and I was playing Vice City on my PS2 in the living room when suddenly a loud metallic bang could be heard from outside, somewhere in the yard. I ran to every window I could to look outside and didn't see anything until I got to the window facing the warehouse in the back. The door was wide open. I immediately went to get the rifle from the closet and went outside. I made my presence known by shouting, "Who's there?" without getting a response. When I got to the door, I made it clear that I had a gun before I looked inside. There was a lot of stuff in there. Someone could have been hiding behind any of those things. Even as a child, I wasn't easily scared, but at that moment I felt really restless, so I closed the door of the warehouse and went back to the house. I locked the door and sat by the window for a long time, watching the storeroom, waiting for the door to open at any moment. That door was heavy and impossible to open on its own. It was a fact that someone came and opened it, but he wasn't sure if they were still inside the building. I decided to call my dad and ask for his opinion. I went to the kitchen to the landline and called my dad's cell phone. He didn't answer, so I left him a voicemail. This was when voicemails still needed to be left because texting was not common. After that, I sat by the window again, but now I put on a TV show in the background to make it less monotonous. I took the phone with me. I was probably about to give up when I heard crackling sounds coming from above. My heart went up in my throat. I had to ask myself the big question, was I scaring myself, or was there someone here? He had a watchdog mentality. Even if I didn't love that place, I saw it as mine, my family's, and I had to protect it, but I was overwhelmed. I grabbed the rifle again and went upstairs. I didn't say anything. Screaming would only let a would-be intruder know that they had heard them. I reached the top of the stairs and turned on the light in the hallway above. There were 5 locked doors. 4 led to the bedrooms and 1 to the bathroom. Each door had a fairly large crack underneath that allowed you to see. The creak I'd heard earlier was coming from the side of the house where my parents' bedroom was, so I knelt down and looked through the crack under the door. I saw 2 bare feet looking at the other side of the door. I felt my stomach twist. The reality of the situation became much more real, and I realized that I wasn't ready to threaten, or God forbid, shoot someone. I got up and quickly went downstairs and hid in the bathroom to call my dad. He still did not answer. I left another voicemail and then called again and again. He never answered. He must have left his phone somewhere. I finally called 911, as I should have done from the beginning, and whispered into the phone the entire time, detailing exactly what was occurring. They told me to sit still in the bathroom and not say a word. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and then they approached the bathroom door, as if whoever it was, somehow, knew that I went straight to the bathroom. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and there was a brief pause before a deep voice said, "What's up, kid?" I still remember the voice and those words so vividly. If I heard that voice today, I would recognize it immediately. I almost wanted to cry because of how scared I was. I disobeyed what the operator told me and spoke. I said loud and clear, "I'm on the phone with the police right now, and I have a gun." I put the operator on speaker while she asked me if everything was okay. The man tried to open the door, and when he realized it was locked, I heard him walk away. I heard the footsteps fade silently, and then the sound of a door slamming shut. It was the sound of the back door, I'm sure. I breathed a sigh of relief, and from that moment on, I waited for the police to arrive. When they did, I felt as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. After a thorough inspection of the house, inside and out, confirming that the man was gone, I was asked if there was any other place I could stay that night, and I said yes, at my uncle's house. We contacted my uncle, who came and talked to the police and then took me to his house. What torments me the most is that it was my fault. I could have avoided this. I left the door unlocked when I went to the warehouse to investigate. Clearly, it was at that moment that the man simply entered the house. Even with a rifle in my hands, I didn't feel safe at all. It was truly the most horrible experience of my life. The old woman. One night, I was home alone for a reason I don't remember. All I know is that my entire family was gone. I was 15 or 16 years old, and I was a big fan of video games back then. I was obsessed with StarCraft, and I admit, sometimes spent a weekend night or two playing StarCraft or another PC game. This was just before the pandemic lockdown began. I was playing StarCraft on my computer in my room on the first floor when the doorbell rang twice. I rushed to the door, not wanting to stray far from the game for fear of losing. I got to the front door and asked, "Who is it?" as I always did when I was alone. A soft, weak voice on the other end said something I couldn't hear clearly. It appeared to be a woman. I opened the door but left the storm door closed, separating myself from an older woman on the other side with a big smile on her face. His hands were behind his back. I said through the door, "Can I help you?" She said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could get in. Ever since I was a child, I was always taught not to let strangers into the house, even if they were women. I felt very uncomfortable. I didn't know how to refuse her. I directed her to the library a few blocks away because they would surely have a phone. Deep down, I knew the library was closed at that time, but I just wanted this stranger who was trying to get into my house to leave. She was still smiling, but what she said next didn't match her smile. He said it was very rude to turn away an old woman who asked for help. I replied in the only way I could think of, and told her that my parents don't allow strangers into the house. It's a house rule. I started to close the door slowly as I told her I was sorry, and she just stood there motionless, but still smiling. And while his smile never changed, he suddenly felt much more threatening. I was walking back to my room when the doorbell rang again. There was no way in the world I was going to open the door again. That woman radiated strange vibes from the beginning. Maybe something was wrong with her, maybe she wasn't in her right mind. These were things I couldn't know, and maybe it was selfish of me to send her away, but I just wasn't going to open the door for anyone when I was home alone. I went back to my game. Not long after I sat down, I heard something bang on the window. It was a metallic sound. The window was right in front of my desk. I had the blinds down so I couldn't see what the noise was doing, but I already had an idea. My room was the only one with the light on in the house. The horrible thought that she was the old woman from before and that she had walked to my window terrified me. I turned off the sound on my computer. At that point, I didn't care about my game anymore. The clanging sound in the window persisted. I basically said, "To hell with this," and went to another room in the house. I sat in the darkness of the room for a while when the doorbell rang again. Now that woman was harassing me. I tried to convince myself that I wasn't a threat, just a crazy old lady who probably had no idea where I was. When the doorbell rang for the second and third time, I decided to open the door and ask if there was anyone I could call for it. But when I opened the door, there was now a man on the other side. He appeared to be about 10 years younger than her. He said through the storm gate, "Have you seen my mother?" I responded by saying, "Yes, she came to my door before." He apologized to me and said that she had dementia and that she had run away from home. Suddenly, I felt bad, but he asked me if I could come in for a minute, and again, I felt uncomfortable. Why did I need to get in? I told him the same thing I told the woman he claimed was his mother. I told him we could talk through the door. I then told her that I thought she had gone to my backyard because she had heard something in my window. I told him he could go and check. He thanked me and walked down the path, and I thought he had gone to the backyard, but when I went back and looked out the window, I didn't see anyone, not him or his mother. All this was too strange for me. I went to bed early that night, falling asleep with the TV on in the background until I heard the clear clanking sound in the window again. Something metallic was hitting the glass. I remembered the worried man and decided to try to help. I went to the window, lifted the blind with my hand, and saw that woman outside my window with the same creepy smile. I was banging a kitchen knife on my window. I pulled down the blinds and got into bed. I didn't feel like this was really happening. A suspiciously short time later, the doorbell rang about 4 times. The knocking on the window had stopped by this time. All this was too suspicious. I felt that it was an attempt at robbery. I ignored the doorbell. I stayed in my bed. I was going to wait for it all to end. I didn't have a mobile phone at the time. I wasn't the most sociable kid growing up. I also didn't want to call the police for any reason. I waited until it finally stopped. The next morning, I told my dad what happened when I called him. He told me that I was smart not to open the door. Everyone agreed that it all looked like an attempted robbery. Is there a possibility that this woman really had dementia and that the man really was her worried son? Perhaps, but everything seemed too coordinated. Why did he also want to enter the house? How did I even know that she came specifically to my house? Why didn't he go to the backyard to get her when I gave him permission to do so? Too many unanswered questions that lead me to believe that I prevented something terrible from happening by not opening that door.